February wrap-up part 2. In this wrap-up, first of all, I'm going to talk about the monthly statistics, and then I will wrap up the 5 books that I read in the last 14 days of February. And I will also talk about how I did with the readathon that I participated, historathon. Let's talk about statistics first. In February, I read a total of 12 books. 5 of them were historical fiction. 2 of them can be classified as general fiction. And I read 1 fantasy, 1 adventure, 1 non-fiction, 1 mystery, and 1 romance book. As for the number of pages of the books that I read 1 book less than 100 pages, 3 books between 100 pages and 200 pages, 2 books between 200 and 300 pages, 3 books between 300 and 400 pages, and 3 books between 400 and 500 pages. In the month of February, I read a total of 3,559 pages. The average number of the pages per book amounted to 296.6 pages. As for the publishing dates, I had a wide variety, like last month. I read 2 books that was written in 1910s, 1 book written in 1930s, 1 book written in 1980s, 1 book written in 1990s, 4 books written between 2000 and 2010, 2 books written between 2011 and 2015, and 1 book written between 2016 and 2019. And 3 of the 12 books can be considered as classic books. 7 of the books that I read was originally written in English. I read 2 books written originally in Turkish, and 1 book written originally in Portuguese, German, and French. I read 2 short stories, 1 graphic novel, and 9 novels. For the target audience, I read 8 adult books, 3 middle grade books, and 1 YA book. I read 8 of the books as e-books. I listened to 3 books in audiobook format, and I read 1 paperback. And my last statistics are my ratings. I rated 1 book 4 out of 10, 1 book 5 out of 10, 1 book 6 out of 10, 4 books 7 out of 10, 8 books 3 out of 10, and 2 books 9 out of 10. And my average rating for those books were 7.08 out of 10. So those were the statistics for February. As I said before, I read a total of 12 books. I previously wrapped up the 7 books that I read in the first 15 days of February in my February wrap-up part 1. I'm going to put the link down below. The 8th book that I finished in February was called Veronica Wants to Die by Paulo Coelho. I read the book in Turkish. It was called Veronika ölmek istiyor. I listened to this in audiobook format. It tells the story of Veronica who committed suicide but did not die. She was committed to a mental hospital in Lithuania. The story goes on from there. The story is told mostly from the point of view of Veronica, but it also switches back between the points of view of the other patients and the head doctor in the hospital as well. I really did not enjoy this book. I thought the book was very depressing, but I should have guessed it because of the title, Veronica Wants to Die. Aside from the book being depressive, I also did not like the structure of the book. I thought it had an uneven tempo, and although the ending was something that we were expecting to happen, and I was pleased with the ending actually, I also did not connect with Veronica. I connected with a secondary character, Maria, she was called, another patient in the hospital. It was a very average book, so I gave it 5 out of 10. Then I read The Night Train to Lisbon, which was one of my most anticipated reads of the month because of the synopsis, because the synopsis was so engaging. It tells the story of a man who finds a book written in Portuguese and suddenly drops everything and goes to Lisbon with a night train to find out more about the author and follow the footsteps of the author, who was also a doctor who resisted the Portuguese dictator Salazar. This was my most disappointing book of the month. If it was not for the book club book, I would have DNF'd it. First of all, maybe it was because of the translation. I'm not really sure because I read it in Turkish. I could not connect with the writing style of the book in the book that was written by the Portuguese doctor. I thought the writing style was pretentious and some of it I think was nonsense, in my opinion, of course. Even though the parts about the Swiss instructor's actions who came to Lisbon to investigate this author made sense and I understood them perfectly. Because I could not understand what motivated him to come to Lisbon, because he fell in love with his writing. And the story pointed out the fact that his writing was enormously beautiful and very moving and effective. I had a hard time being invested in the story as well as being not connected with the Swiss instructor. And the tempo was incredibly slow as well. Also, I was expecting to know more about the Salazar's time, the dictator's time in Portugal. I mean, it made some hints about how ruthless the dictatorship was. But those hints were not enough to satisfy my curiosity. So it was a disappointment in many different ways. That's why I gave it 4 out of 10. The reason I did not rate it lower was because some of the secondary characters were very interesting, in my opinion. So Night Train to Lisbon was my lowest rated book of the month. Then I finished my favorite book for this half of the month, Taming of the Queen by Phillippa Gregory. We read this with Marissa Curtis. The book tells the story of the last and the surviving wife of Henry VIII, Catherine Parr. It tells the time period between Henry's proposal and Henry's death, how Henry changed with time. Marissa and I both enjoyed this book very much. I found this book much easier to read than her previous books, and Marissa felt the same as me because she struggled with some of her other works. It was a joy to read this book almost at the same time as Night Train to Lisbon, which was a big bore. But aside from the fact that it was easy to read, I think this book had much more, because I read the books by her other wives and some of the people closest to Henry. It was really interesting to see how point of view changed, how you feel about a certain character. I actually felt a bit sympathetic towards Henry in the beginning of the book, because Catherine was also sympathetic and caring towards Henry at the beginning of the book. But that changed towards the end of the book, of course. He became much more ruthless and very hateful person. But I never thought that he was mad, because Catherine never thought that he was mad. But in the previous books, he was portrayed as a madman who lost all of his reason. I think reading the books back to back has helped me to understand the time period, how a person's perspective can change when the narrative changes. I think this is a very interesting lesson for historical narratives. As I've said before, this was my favorite book for the last part of February, and I gave the book 8 out of 10. After finishing Night Train to Lisbon, I really needed a quick, fun and easy read, and I chose another series finisher book, although this series was not in my Stacking the Series challenge. I read the second book in Castles Ever After series by Tessa. I previously read the third book and the first book, and the second book was the only book left in the series. It was called Say Yes to the Marquess, and it told the story of Coelho, who inherits a castle, tries to break off his engagement with a Marquess who has been abroad for many years. And Marquis' brother, Raphael, comes to visit her to persuade her to go on with the wedding. Also tries to make her feel enthusiastic towards wedding by preparing the perfect wedding for Coelho. But as you can guess, things turned out differently for them. I really enjoy Tessa's books, and I gave the other two books 4 stars out of 5 stars before, but I gave this book 7 out of 10 because although it was very fun, it was enjoyable to read, it was sexy in the way that I like, and I will explain this later, and it was romantic. I think this book was lacking the wit that I liked in the first and the third book. Jokes were not as clever as the first and the third books in the series, and that's why I decreased 1 point from this book. And as for the sexiness level, I'm going to say that it had a middle level sexiness. It has some sex scenes, and if you like clean romance, I think you should steer off Tessa Dare. Sex scenes do not dominate the story, and it occurs, I think, 2 or 3 times. I would advise this book if you like a fun, quick historical romance. I finished the month with a Turkish classic, Yaprak Dökümü by Reşat, Nuri, Güntekin. The title can be translated as Falling of the Leaves. It tells the story of a family at the end of 1920s and 1930s. In this family, the father is a very proud, honest, and has very high morals. But he thinks that his family is also like that. But when the family goes through a period of low income and poverty, all the members of the family start to fall from the tree like leaves falling from the trees. This book has been made into a very famous TV series in Turkey. So I knew the story very well, but I had never read the book. And when I saw it was available as an audiobook, I thought listening to it would be a good choice. And I was surprised by how much I liked the writing style of the author, because I thought it would be sort of like a tragedy. It was a tragedy, I think, but it contained elements of dark humor. And all the characters were morally grey, and the author criticized all of their hypocrisy. And I like this point very much, and I would like to read more from this author. So I gave this book 7 out of 10, although I really enjoyed the writing style, because the characters were flawed and not likable and I could not connect with them. I thought 7 out of 10 was the appropriate rating for this book. So those were the 5 books that I read in the second half of the month, and I'm going to talk about how I did with historathon. In my February TBR, where I talked about my historathon goals, I made a goal of doing 2 bingos, and I managed to do 2 bingos, but I've changed a book because I thought Persepolis was a historical fiction book, but it turned out to be a non-fiction memoir. So I could not use Persepolis for this readathon. So I read Esperanza Rising for historathon, and I really enjoyed it. I talked about that book in my previous wrap-up. So let's get on with the prompts. For the prompt of reading a book with a male on the cover, I read a short story by Ömer Seyfettin, Pembe İncilik Attan. It was a middle grade short story, and I gave it 6 out of 10. For a book set in a country outside the US and Europe, I read Esperanza Rising by Pen Munoz Ryan, and I gave it 8 out of 10. It was another middle grade book and I enjoyed it very, very much. For a book concerning an event and time you are unfamiliar with, I read Night Train to Lisbon, and I used the same book for a book with a location in the title. And lastly, for a book featuring a real historical person, I read Taming the Queen. So I managed to do my 2 bingos like I planned. Please comment down below, have you read any of the books that I've read? What was your favorite and least favorite book that you read in the month of February? And also comment down below on anything you like. And if you are a new viewer and you like this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. Hope to see you very soon. Bye! For Turkish word of the day, since I talked about Night Train to Lisbon a lot, I thought the word of the day should be night. Night means gece in Turkish, and gece is our Turkish word of the day. Have a good day!